There's no way for me as your parish priest not to ask you to pause and reflect on this evil. At the same time, there are many things that I could do that would be easy. It would be easy for me to tell you that this is just a sign of the times, that such evil happens when a nation has turned itself away from its core values, the values that formed it, and has slid into decadence and decay. It would be easy to point out that evil flourishes because people abandon God and Satan comes in to fill the vacuum. It would be easy, even, to call you and the greater community to look at ourselves and repent of our own personal sins and our own failings and our own selfishness, which contributes to the general malaise and hard-heartedness of our society. And all of those things would not only be easy, but they would be true. But to stop there and leave it at that would actually be dishonest of me. Truth is often simple, brothers and sisters in Christ, but it is never easy. That's a difference. Maybe some of you, like me, cringed on Friday when you heard the news, and then equally cringed at the vulture-like coverage that the media began in full swing. Non-stop news coverage, looking for any little bit of information and repeating the same horrific details ad nauseum for no real purpose. And my knee-jerk, as some of the anchors opportunistically brought up the issue of gun control, a hot-button political object, immediately politicizing this tragedy, before they even knew the full story. And there are many details that are still not publicly available. Many sensibly called for a time of mourning first before we should talk about such things. So my question for you today is if you are ready to think about that topic a little bit. Are you ready to reflect on the topic, at least from a Christian perspective, to see what it is that maybe we might do or change? So let me begin with a full disclosure. I grew up in a hunting family in Michigan. My father is a former Marine sharpshooter. Guns were in my house as a child and around me. I was trained from a young age how to handle properly a firearm, how to maintain it, how to discharge it safely, how to respect it as a dangerous tool. Having grown up around Detroit as well, I've never particularly believed that a prohibition-style ban on guns is particularly effective and generally only serves to take guns out of the hands of law-abiding citizens and not criminals. And that gun-free zones, like those we see around places like Virginia Tech or Sandy Hook Elementary School, may possibly deter individual incidents of gun violence or accidental gun use by children, for example, but at the same time, they also present vulnerable targets for sociopaths like the one that we saw. Now, it seems to me, and when I say it seems to me, it's just personal opinion, that we have armed guards in our banks, and we have armed guards in our museums and places and monuments because they guard the things that we treasure, both private and public. I don't understand why we don't have such security in the places where our most precious treasures are to be found. Having grown up around Detroit in the 1980s, we saw a slew of very sad and tragic gun violence in the public schools. And increased security in those schools did appear to make an impact and reduce violence. Now, Detroit is still an extraordinarily violent place, but in the schools themselves, that violence, especially gun violence, has been reduced. And last decade, of course, the increased security that we've seen at our airports has certainly contributed to preventing another terrorist attack like we saw on September 11th. So it seems to me a small price to pay for what it is that we're protecting. And that's just my opinion and my perspective for what it's worth, and I'm giving it to you in full disclosure, so you know where I'm coming from. Fairly moderate center-right position, I guess. But the recent rash of the mass murder event that we've seen in Connecticut, in Colorado, in the mall, things they're happening so often I'm losing track of them, to be honest with you. It forces me to re-examine my commitment as a Christian to the level of permissiveness that we have in our gun laws. It appears now, though there were at first conflicting reports, that the majority of the killing was done with a Bushmaster .223 caliber rifle. Now some will argue this is not an assault rifle, but it is a fairly paramilitary rifle. It looks like an M16. It's a semi-automatic rifle, which means you only fire as often as you pull the trigger. However, did you know what it takes to turn that rifle into a fully functional automatic weapon? Access to YouTube and a rubber band. That's all it takes. So maybe just look it up. I'm blown away what you can find on YouTube. And from what the medical examiners have said, we're looking at the children who were killed were riddled with bullets. It wasn't semi-automatic fire. So I have to be honest with you and wonder if, in fact, all guns were created equal. There is no question that the number of deaths that we've seen in these type of incidences, when the shooter uses a weapon capable of automatic fire, even easily modified to do so, this is not coincidental. Would it really, honestly, be a terrible abrogation of our Second Amendment if we made these kind of weapons or high-capacity magazines and the like extremely difficult to procure? The recent shooter, as we know, at least we think we know, in all likelihood used perfectly legal weapons, legally procured. And our nation has the highest ratio of guns to citizenry. Did you know how much it is? Something around 9 guns for every 10 citizens. That's what? Around 300 million guns. I don't think we're in any danger of a totalitarian regime taking us over because we're not well armed. It also has the highest rate of gun-caused homicide and accidental deaths. The more guns, the more deaths. It's not rocket science. And it's exponentially higher than many other developed countries. In fact, you know what the second most well-armed country in the world is? Yemen. You're in good company with Yemen. So can we maybe get off of the rhetoric and get off of the political ridiculousness and really start to talk about responsible firearm ownership and regulation as adults and put the rhetoric behind? It's become a public safety issue. Now, but you may say, but Father, and I would agree with you, guns don't kill people, people kill people. That's true. And Friday's massacre involved a young sociopath, upon whom the label mentally ill was facilely slapped. And it doesn't really mean much. In fact, it's kind of insulting. There are hundreds of thousands of mentally ill people in the United States alone. People who struggle with mental illness, who deal with depression, even suicidal depression, who have developmental disorders, who have social anxieties, or who just aren't well adjusted. But they don't all go on rampages. They don't dress in tactical gear and modify weapons with predetermination to cause as much destruction as possible. So if we're going to have a meaningful discussion about gun control or gun ownership, maybe we should also have a mature and more sophisticated discussion about what is mental illness in our society, because it is an epidemic. It would also, by the way, help if we started looking at spiritual illness. Perhaps the two aren't really that different from each other, but as Christians we understand the reality and the existence of sin and the demonic as well. Many find it an equally reprehensible abrogation of freedom to suggest that perhaps we limit access of our young people to such things as violent entertainment, video games, movies, and pornography. And pornography, brothers and sisters, is intrinsically violent as well. There are films which are available now, very easily to watch, your children can do it, which glorify, not only depict these kind of rampages, but glorify these rampages and the shooters therein. And they've been around for many years now. And there are first-person shooter games. You know what that means? It's a video game in which you are looking at the perspective of someone who's running around being a mass murderer and killing people. I'm not just talking about the military warfare games, which even I don't like those because I think spiritually they're very bad for you, and they're not reflective of real combat in many regards. But games in which there's just wanton violence, snipers, random killings, and it's laughed off. It's just a game. There is no doubt in my mind that a steady diet of this type of quote-unquote entertainment contributes to the soul-deadening, sociopathic thought process that goes into planning and executing a mass murder. Can we start to talk about that responsibly, maturely, without being afraid of being labeled as prohibitionist or old-fashioned or what have you? You know, in our schools, we test our children. We test. We test them for academic achievement. We test to see if they are gifted and talented. The science of psychology that we have available to us is not so primitive that we cannot also test for sociological and psychological disorders. We used to be a lot more aware of the moral character of our young people, and we used to talk about it in schools. I don't know if we're even allowed to do that anymore, lest we violate some religious non-freedom. Our love for the freedom of privacy is limited in many places under the law already, and sensibly so. Would it not be wiser to begin to identify such troubled individuals in a systematic and caring and preventative way early on, than to find out after they have caused harm that everyone in their neighborhood and everyone in their family is not surprised? Oh yeah, he always was kind of weird. Well, if I know that there is a bomb about to go off in a public place, and out of whatever reason I decide not to bring it up to anybody and not to report it, am I not somehow morally culpable in the damage that it causes? How much more so if that time bomb is actually a person? Is it Christian love to just neglect the broken soul in my neighborhood, in my children's school, in my own family? Is it Christian love to hope for the best, not press the issue, give people their space and their privacy, when I know they go shooting, they have a high collection of guns, and they have a child who's got mental illness. Is that really Christian love? Brothers and sisters, we have 20 or so dead children and another 6 adults who died, partly because of the disconnection in our society between neighbors, between family members. There is a coldness of heart and a callousness towards each other that has crept into our society. When I grew up, I lived on a street, and on that street, everybody knew everybody, and we didn't necessarily know everybody else's business, but you knew who was having troubles, and you knew who was kind of flaky. You knew who was probably going to go to jail. It wasn't a surprise. But we didn't just sit by and let it happen. If we could do something about it, we cared about each other. We talked to each other. We prayed for each other. We took care of each other's children. And if we saw something wrong, we did something. To be a Christian means to take a radical level of responsibility for our neighbor. Not to say, am I my brother's keeper? That's not my problem. That is the logic of the first murderer, Cain. Let it not be ours. Brothers and sisters, may God have mercy on all those who are hurt, and may the memory of those children be eternal. Christ is among us.